163 men started, 12 finished. Every man who walked into those woods was already among the finest soldiers the United States Army had. They were Green Berets, they were Rangers, they had combat tours behind them, mountain tabs on their shoulders, and reputations that walked into the room before they did. They arrived believing they were ready for anything the Army could put in front of them. 3 weeks later, 12 of them remained. The other 151 were gone. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Almost none of them were carried out on a stretcher. Most of them simply quit. This is the story of the very first Delta Force selection, and the reason its numbers have never really been beaten. Not the numbers you have heard repeated 1,000 times on the internet. The real ones, written down by a man who was actually there. For years, the figure that gets thrown around about this unit is a 99% failure rate. You have probably heard it. It sounds impressive, and it is almost certainly false, because nobody who repeats it can tell you where it comes from. So set it aside. We are going to use a number that is documented, that has a name attached to it, and that is somehow even more brutal than the myth. The man is Eric Haney. He was one of the original members of Delta Force, and years later he wrote a memoir called Inside Delta Force. In it he describes his own selection course, the class he stood in. 163 men reported in. When it was over, the number selected to continue was 12. That is not a rounded figure or a rumor. That is a first-hand count from a founding operator. And once you understand what those men went through, you stop asking why so many failed. You start asking how 12 of them did not. But to understand why the standard was set so cruelly high, you have to understand why the unit existed at all. In 1972, at the Munich Olympics, a terrorist group took 11 Israeli athletes hostage, and the rescue attempt ended in disaster. The whole world watched, and governments realized they had no answer to this kind of threat. Some nations built new units in response. The United States, for years, did not. There was a man arguing that it should, and almost nobody was listening to him. That man was Colonel Charlie Beckwith. In the early 1960s, Beckwith had spent a year on an exchange tour with the British Special Air Service, the SAS. He came home convinced that America needed its own version, a small unit of mature, independent men, trained for hostage rescue, and the missions nobody else could do. He wrote it up. He briefed it, and for more than a decade the Army mostly ignored him. It was only in 1977, with the threat of terrorism finally impossible to wave away, that he was given permission to build the thing he had been describing for 15 years. He was not going to waste it. He refused to soften a single standard he had learned overseas. He did not want the strongest men. He did not want the fastest. He wanted men who would keep making sound decisions long after their bodies had stopped cooperating. And he had one test in particular that he believed would find them. They call it the Long Walk. On paper, it is a land navigation march. In reality, it is the thing that ends most Delta Force careers before they ever begin. A candidate carries a rucksack that starts at around 50 pounds and climbs past 70 as the days go on. He moves alone, across the Appalachian Mountains, from one point to the next, using a map and a compass and nothing else. There is no pack of buddies to lean on. There is no instructor shouting encouragement. There is a distance, and there is a clock, and here is the cruelest detail of the entire event. The candidate is never told the standard. He is never told how far he has to go. He is never told how fast. He simply walks, and at some point a man at a checkpoint either tells him to continue or tells him he is finished. Sit with that for a moment, because it is the whole point. If you knew the finish line was 40 miles away, you could pace yourself. You could tell yourself, just 10 more miles, just 5 more, and your mind would organize the pain into something survivable. Beckwith took that away on purpose. He wanted to see what a man does when he cannot bargain with the distance, when there is no visible end, when every step could be the last one or the first of another 20. That uncertainty is the weapon. It is not the mountain that breaks these men, it is the not knowing. If you appreciate history told straight, without the hype and without the invented numbers, subscribe to War Code. What I am about to tell you next is the part almost everyone gets wrong, and it is the reason the 12 were different from the 151. Because here is what people assume. They assume the men who quit were weak. They picture soldiers who could not carry the weight, who collapsed, who were physically finished. That is not what happened. Remember who these men were. They were already Rangers and Green Berets. Every one of them could carry a heavy ruck a long way. Physically, almost all of them were capable of finishing. That is what makes this course so unusual and so revealing. The men did not fail because their legs gave out. They failed because their minds made a decision. Somewhere out on that mountain, cold, alone, feet destroyed, with no idea how much further they had to go, a voice inside each man started making an argument. It said, "This is pointless." It said, "You have already proven yourself." It said, "You have a good career waiting for you back at your unit. A career you are throwing away for a walk in the woods that may not even end." And the terrible genius of the course is that every word of that argument is reasonable. Quitting is the sane choice. Any rational person would quit. The 12 who continued were, in a sense, being unreasonable. They kept walking toward a finish line they could not see, for reasons they could not fully explain, and that specific quality is the thing Delta was built to find. There was pressure on Beckwith to lower the bar, and it was not abstract. While he was building Delta, the Army had stood up a second, temporary unit called Blue Light, drawn from the 5th Special Forces Group, to cover the counter-terrorism mission until Delta was ready. In other words, there was a rival waiting in the wings, and every month Beckwith spent filtering men down to a tiny handful was a month his critics could point to and say the concept was not working. He could have filled the ranks quickly. He could have selected 60 men instead of 12 and silenced the doubters. He chose not to. He would rather field 12 of the right men than 100 of the wrong ones, even if it nearly cost him the unit. Beckwith had a word for what he was hunting. He wanted men with a certain quiet determination, not aggression, not swagger. The loud men, the ones who showed up talking about how they would crush selection, were very often the first to fold because their toughness was a performance, and performances need an audience. Out on that mountain there is no audience. There is only a man and his own private argument with himself. The ones who lasted tended to be quieter, older, harder to read. They did not need anyone to watch them suffer. They had simply decided, somewhere deep down, that they were going to keep going until a human being physically stopped them. And when a man decided he was done, it was over in an instant, and it was permanent. There was no arguing, and no second attempt later in the week. He told a member of the cadre he was quitting, or he simply failed to reach a standard he had never been shown, and he was pulled off the mountain and pointed back toward the life he came from, often that same day. There was no appeal. That finality is part of the design too. Every man out there knew that the decision forming in his head, the one quietly whispering that he should stop, was a door that swung only one way. Say the words out loud, and the thing he had spent years chasing was gone for good. Knowing that did not make it easier to keep walking. For most of them, it made it harder, because now the temptation to quit and the fear of quitting were both riding on his back along with the rucksack. And selection was not one event. It built. Days of individual marches over increasing distances, under increasing weight, with almost no feedback, so that a man never knew if he was passing or failing. That absence of feedback is deliberate too. In a normal army school, cadre tell you where you stand. Here they tell you nothing, because they are watching how you behave when you are starved of the one thing every soldier wants, which is to know whether his effort is good enough. Then, at the very end, the survivors are brought before a board, the Delta officers and the commander himself, and asked a plain question. Why are you here? No trumpets, no cheering, just men who have already decided you might belong, testing one last time whether you understand what you are asking to join. There was another layer to all of this, one the candidates could not see. Beckwith did not design the course alone. He worked with Army psychologists to define the exact profile he was after, and to build the assessments that would reveal it. That is why so much of selection seems to make no tactical sense. The silence, the refusal to give feedback, the endless hours alone with your own thoughts. It was engineered to surface the things a psychologist would look for: emotional stability under stress, self-reliance when no one is coming to help, the ability to keep functioning when the situation is unclear and the rules seem to keep shifting. They were not just measuring how far a man could walk. They were building a picture of how his mind behaved when it was carrying a load it could not put down. Now think again about the arithmetic. 163 of the Army's best, 12 chosen. That is roughly 7 out of every 100, but the raw percentage undersells it. Because this was not a random sample of the Army. These were pre-selected men, volunteers who were already elite before they arrived. The course took the top of the top and still sent nearly all of them home. The filter was not measuring whether you were good. Everyone there was good. It was measuring something rarer, harder to fake, and impossible to install in a man in 3 weeks. Either he had it when he arrived, or the mountain found out that he did not. And here is something most people never realize. Being one of the 12 was not the finish. It was the door. Passing selection only earned a man the right to begin months of further training, the operator course, where he learned the actual trade, the shooting, the breaching, the close work, any one of which could still wash him out. So the number is even starker than it looks. 163 men gambled weeks of pain for nothing more than a chance to start over at the bottom of something harder. 12 of them thought that trade was worth it. That tells you what kind of man the unit is made of. It is also why the course has aged so well. Weapons change. Enemies change. The gear a soldier carries today would look like science fiction to Haney's class. But the thing the long walk measures does not change, because it is not about the equipment. It is about what a specific kind of man does when he is exhausted, alone, uncertain, and handed every reasonable excuse to stop. That is as true now as it was then, which is why the modern course, for all its updates, still comes down to a man, a ruck, a mountain, and a clock he is not allowed to see. So when you hear the internet number, the 99%, understand why the real story is better. The truth does not need to be exaggerated. 163 of the finest soldiers in the United States, and only 12 of them possessed the one quality that could not be taught. The rest were not weak, they were not cowards. They were, most of them, completely rational. They made the sensible decision, and that is precisely why they were not selected. Delta was never looking for sensible. The next time you see footage of these men, faces blurred, names withheld, moving through a doorway somewhere in the world, remember what it took just to be counted among them. Not the shooting, not the kit. A walk through the mountains with no end in sight, and a decision, made privately, in the dark, to keep going anyway. 12 out of 163. That is the real number, and it has never needed to be inflated. If you want the true version of these stories, the sourced version, told without the hype, subscribe to War Code, and I will see you on the next one.